Welcome to Little Secrets, where we uncover the most fascinating stories from the world of technology. Today, we're diving deep into the legendary battle between Sony and Nintendo, a rivalry that started as a partnership but turned into one of the biggest betrayals in gaming history. Nintendo was the undisputed king of the video game industry while Sony was just an outsider trying to break in. But when a secret betrayal at the last minute destroyed their partnership, Sony fought back and created the PlayStation, a console that would change gaming forever. How did a friendly deal between Sony and Nintendo turn into one of the most legendary rivalries in gaming? Let's dive into the untold story of Sony versus Nintendo. Back in the late 1980s, Nintendo was the king of gaming. The Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, had dominated the market, and by the early 90s the Super Nintendo, SNES, was the most powerful console ever made. But Nintendo had one problem. Their games were stored on cartridges, which were expensive and had limited storage. Meanwhile, CD-ROM technology was emerging, offering more space for better graphics, sound, and bigger games. To compete, Nintendo decided to partner with Sony to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the SNES. Sony was chosen because they had experience in audio technology and had already developed the Super Nintendo's sound chip. And in 1988, Sony and Nintendo signed a deal. Sony would create a new system called the PlayStation, with a space between the words, which would play both SNES cartridges and new CD-based games. It seemed like a win-win for both companies. At CES 1991, Sony proudly took the stage and announced the PlayStation, a Nintendo-branded console powered by Sony's technology. But Nintendo had secretly made a deal behind Sony's back. The very next day, Nintendo shocked the world by announcing that they had abandoned Sony and were partnering with Philips instead. Sony executives were humiliated. The deal they had worked on for years was suddenly destroyed. Nintendo thought that without them, Sony would walk away from gaming forever. But instead, they created the PlayStation, and it changed gaming forever. Instead of giving up, Sony took their PlayStation prototype and turned it into a completely new console. In 1994, Sony launched the PlayStation, a powerful 32-bit console that crushed the competition. Unlike Nintendo's cartridges, Sony's CD-based games were cheaper, bigger, and easier to produce. Developers loved it, players loved it, and by 1996 the PlayStation was outselling the Nintendo 64. Nintendo had made a huge mistake, and they were losing the battle. By the early 2000s, the war between Sony and Nintendo was in full force. Sony released the PlayStation 2, which became the best-selling console of all time. Meanwhile, Nintendo struggled with the GameCube, which lost to both the PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's Xbox. Sony's PlayStation became the dominant force in gaming, while Nintendo's sales plummeted. It looked like Sony had won the war, but Nintendo had one last trick up its sleeve. When everyone thought Nintendo was done, they launched the Nintendo Wii in 2006. Instead of competing directly with Sony and Microsoft on power and graphics, the Wii changed gaming completely with its motion controls and family-friendly games. It became a cultural phenomenon, outselling the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 for years. Nintendo had found a new way to win. Today, Sony and Nintendo are no longer direct competitors. Sony dominates the world of high-end gaming with the PlayStation 5. Nintendo dominates the world of family-friendly and portable gaming with the Switch. They've both won in their own way, but without Nintendo's betrayal, Sony might have never entered gaming, and we might have never gotten the PlayStation. The war between Sony and Nintendo changed gaming forever. Nintendo accidentally created its biggest rival, and Sony took over the gaming industry because of it. Who do you think won the battle, Sony or Nintendo? Let us know in the comments. And if you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Little Secrets for more amazing stories from the world of technology.